If you've been keeping up with the releases of this generation, you may have noticed a rather disheartening trend. There have been a lot of remasters, like a lot. Saints Row 4, The Last of Us, all of the Halo titles, the older Legend of Zeldas, Grim Fandango, Indigo Prophecy, Devil May Cry 4, God of War 3, and the list goes on. In fact, two of the biggest upcoming releases for the Xbox One are a collection of classic Rare titles and another collection of all of the last-gen Gears of War games. It feels like every week we're getting an announcement for a new remaster. Games like Final Fantasy XII and Resident Evil 0 are getting teased and announced for possible re-releases. This barrage of enhanced and updated releases of games isn't anything new. In fact, it's been a core principle of Capcom's business for decades. From Street Fighter II to Super Street Fighter II to Super Street Fighter II Turbo to Super Street Fighter II Turbo HD Remix, Capcom's been well known for their insistence on releasing the same game over and over with minor updates. In fact, they've even gone as far as to publicly admit that HD remasters of their hit titles will be one of their key business activities, and after the massive success that was the Resident Evil HD remaster, you can't blame them. It was their fastest selling digital game ever made. For a lot of people, these remasters and re-releases are fantastic. They give gamers the opportunity to play older titles they would have never had the chance to play. Grim Fandango was next to impossible to reasonably get a hold of, but the remaster now allows for newer gamers to experience one of the most critically acclaimed games of all time. Hell, if it wasn't for the HD remaster of Resident Evil 4 on PC, I probably never would have even played it. Some fantastic older titles are now legally available for people that weren't even alive during their release to enjoy. These remasters also allow for classic games to become more fleshed out and utilize newer technologies. The HD remaster of the first Resident Evil featured a new control scheme that made playing the game a hell of a lot more intuitive and a hell of a lot easier for modern gamers to acclimate to. The remaster of Indigo Prophecy actually has a feature where you can switch between the old and new visuals with the press of a button to compare and contrast. Remasters are great for newcomers to gaming, and for fans of these older titles, it can change their entire perception of their favorite games. Gameplay and controls and visuals can all be improved to provide a more immersive experience, and that's something I think everyone can appreciate. But underneath all of the pleasantries, all of the nostalgia and rose-tinted admiration for the classics, there's a deep-rooted issue in the AAA industry as a whole that I think a lot of people are starting to become more aware of. Remasters are becoming a little too frequent, and developers are using Remaster as a way to release the finished versions of their games. I first noticed this with Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin. For those who are unaware, Dark Souls 2, released in 2014 for the PS3, Xbox 360, and PC, was considered to be a lackluster follow-up to its predecessor. The developers from Software decided to update the game to possibly sway gamers back to their side by rebalancing the items and adding some new content. Alongside this massive update came a new version of Dark Souls 2 that included all of the DLC, titled Dark Souls 2 Scholar of the First Sin, released in 2015 for the Xbox One, PlayStation 4, and PC. For the next-gen consoles, this was perfect. They could finally play the game in HD with prettier graphics and greater performance, but PC players got the short end of the stick. If you own the original version of Dark Souls 2 on PC, you have to pay $30 to upgrade to Scholar of the First Sin. So if you owned all of the DLC already, you'd be paying $30 for what amounts to nothing more than a graphical update. This, surprisingly, isn't that uncommon. Sleeping Dogs Definitive Edition, Metro Last Light Redux, and Devil May Cry 4 Special Edition all did the same thing. They're all releases of the same relatively recent game with minor updates, sometimes minor content or visual updates. But if you own the original, you have to buy the game again or pay a fairly unreasonable amount to upgrade to the more graphically impressive version. Unlike the Game of the Year and complete editions of games that normally just contain all of the DLC, these versions have better visuals, more detailed worlds, and sometimes whole new chunks of content and characters. They are the definitive editions. They are what the original version of the game was supposed to be. Right now, they're springing up like weeds. So many of the games from the last generation are seeing releases on newer hardware with newer content and newer visuals and better performance. It's nice to see the games get a facelift, but it's also something that's troublesome. Instead of companies making new games, they're just making the same games and wasting development time and money. When they could be making new games that push the boundaries and change up the way we play, they're instead taking the safest route possible and just re-releasing something that's already proven to be popular. Why bother making something new and taking the risk of it just not selling when something like Resident Evil HD Remaster can sell 1 million copies in only a few months? That's not to say that remasters are bound to sell well and automatically receive universal praise. I mean, just look at Fable Anniversary, but if they fail, it's not like that much is lost, it's just a port. It's not a whole new game that took years of planning and development. As much as I loathe the idea of a remaster-centric world, remasters aren't the problem so much as they are a result of the problem. The technology we use to play games is becoming more and more complex every year, and this rapid advancement is resulting in us losing the ability to enjoy some of the more classic titles. All of these remasters are great in that respect, as it allows older games to be played on consoles that aren't built to do so. It keeps them alive. At the same time, though, developers are abusing the lack of backwards compatibility to release games from last gen with minor updates. It's not great, but it is very, very smart. Gamers are buying these new additions. There are always posts on Reddit of people saying how much they'd love an HD remaster of this, that, and the other thing. The nostalgic love for things of the past overtakes a lot of people, and it's very easy for developers to exploit that. People are clamoring at the chance to play last gen games in 1080p HD at 60 frames per second on their big screen TVs. All the while, consumers tend to forget that high quality visuals don't really make a game better. If anything, this push for remasters and re-releases and definitive editions of technically incomplete games is just one big sign that the AAA industry has lost its creative edge. Of the top 20 games on Xbox One, 8 of them are remasters, and on the PS4, 6 of them are remasters. The titles that are new and original and aren't just sequels are tanking hard and being mishandled and chocked full of DLC to act as a cushion for any possible failure. And the most successful original games are coming from indies, and while that's fine, I can't help but think back to 2007 when all the brand new AAA franchises started. Some of the most beloved series and stories and characters and worlds all sprung up from the AAA publishers and developers in that year. They all tried to push the envelope, and now it just doesn't feel the same. Everything's felt so formulaic and iterative lately, and this huge push for remasters is just adding on to that. I love remasters. I love what they can do for the industry as a whole. Games that are decades old can be brought back to life for new people to experience, and that's something I love. A lot of these I wouldn't have even bothered to play just because they were so hard to get a hold of, but we've reached a point where this whole remaster system is being abused. Developers are getting away with charging full price for a visual upgrade or minor content that could have just been DLC. We're losing what made games so great. Any experience can be created, but we're just seeing the same ones in glorious HD. I think this is really all you need to see to understand my frustration. When some of the biggest announcements at E3 weren't of exciting new games or original ideas or brand new innovations, they were announcements of remakes and remasters of things that already exist, there's something very, very wrong.